Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here on this fine morning. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you to the Arab Center Graduate Winter School program. My name is Dana El Kurd. I'm a researcher at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies and an assistant professor at its sister institution, the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. You'll have to excuse me for any coughing fits this morning. Before we move forward with the opening remarks, I'd like to take a few minutes to tell you about the idea behind this program and give you some more context about the Arab Center and the Doha Institute. So in a few months, the Arab Center will celebrate its 10th anniversary. It was created at the height of the Arab Spring and dedicated itself to the values of democracy, Arab unity over sectarian cleavages, and egalitarianism. For the past 10 years, the Arab Center has established itself as the leading research center in the region working on these topics and a focal point for Arab academics as well as those studying the Arab world. The center is both research-oriented and policy-oriented, so we have a research division as well as a political analysis unit, a publishing division, a book translating and book publishing division, and the Doha Historical Dictionary of Arabic project. And since our founding, the Arab Center has acted as the primary academic publishing house in the Arab world with over 250 books published across the social sciences and humanities. Has held tens of conferences on a yearly basis, reaching over 100 conferences, covering the most pressing, pivotal issues for Arab citizens, has developed 6 peer-reviewed academic journals in Arabic, and more recently also in English with our new journal, Al-Muntaqa, which is available open source if anybody's interested. And finally founded the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies, a first-of-its-kind graduate school that provides a key service and access to higher education both to the local community here in Qatar and to the region as a whole. So the Graduate Winter School program in particular is in line with a broader academic outreach initiative begun at the Arab Center since 2017, intended to foster two-way engagement between Western and Arab scholarship and create a space in the Arab world for critical academics. In this vein, the Academic Outreach Unit has undertaken events such as the Arab Graduate Student Conference and now the Graduate Winter School, as well as fostered publication initiatives such as the new Arab Center series with Hearst Publishers. The Winter School intends to provide an in-depth and critical look at select topics in the broader study of the Middle East, so we're a little bit different from some of the summer school options that kind of take a more broad scope. We try to stick to some pressing topic. And for participating scholars, it's intended to provide an opportunity to network with academics from the region and receive feedback from respected scholars on the topic. And the theme, as you all know, for this year is Sectarianism, Communitarianism, and the State. And it was chosen not only to reflect a pressing concern for the Arab world, but also emerging research trends in a variety of social science disciplines. The program provides an unprecedented opportunity for all of you to engage with scholars from across the globe and speak to experts on the topics you are studying right here at the Arab Center. So to ensure the most fruitful experience for everyone, I would encourage you to engage with your peers and the other participants on their research and enter into useful discussions and learn more about where everybody's coming from. I mean, just the participants alone, we have 19 countries represented. That's aside from our discussants and some of the observers. So I'm sure this will generate very interesting conversations. And your folders should have all of the information regarding the after-hours activities and dinners. So that'll hopefully provide you a space to get to know each other and engage with the Arab Center researchers. And on that note, I'd like to also thank, before beginning, the logistic coordinators for this conference for all their hard work, and of course our gracious discussants who have come from near and far to help us with this initiative. And I'm very optimistic that it'll be a productive experience for all of us. So now that I've explained a little bit, we can go on to the main event. I'm sure you're not here to hear me. It's my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Azmi Bishara. I'm pretty sure you already know who he is, but just to say a few brief words on his academic career. He's the founder and general director of the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. He is also the main force behind the establishment of the Arab Center as well as the Doha Institute. He was a professor of philosophy and cultural studies at Palestine's Birzeit University until 1996. There he contributed to the establishment of a number of academic institutions in Palestine, including Muwatan, the Palestinian Institute for the Study of Democracy, and Mad al-Karmel, an institute devoted to the applied social sciences. He is the author of several books and manuscripts in Arabic, English, and in German, covering questions of political philosophy, citizenship, and social theory. The list is very long, but some include his 3-volume book on religion and secularism, as well as his book on civil society. And he's also spearheaded the study of sectarianism in Arabic with a number of articles on the subject, as well as his latest book, which was recently released in Arabic, and will be also released in its English adaptation with Hearst Publishers this year. In sum, Dr. Azmi has had a profound impact on Arab social sciences and academia overall, and we are grateful to have him here today to discuss the central thesis of his book, Sectarianism and Imagined Sects. So please help me welcome Dr. Azmi.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning for everybody. I welcome you all for this adventure that we started with the winter school. You can imagine if this is our winter, how would our summer look like? So that's why it's a winter school, not a summer school, as you understand. And of course, as Dan, I can't speak as fast as Dan, you know, it's not mine. But as Dan explained, I have this topic anyway behind me. I usually write my book and forget about them. I don't come to them anymore, but Dana and our friends here insisted that I say some opening remarks, not a lecture, and some opening remarks about the subjects, exactly because I'm reviewing the translation of my book now to English. I wrote it in Arabic, as all of my books actually are written in Arabic. Now, of course, I don't have to explain much about the importance, the significance of this subject for the Middle East, for Arab societies, but also in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, and in other countries. It takes different forms, but at the end, the issue of community state and sectarianism is, of course, a significant issue, as we are reminded now with the uprisings in Iraq and Lebanon that we were so optimistic about in the last few months, because a mainstream in the civil society, in the Iraqi and Lebanese civil society, lastly revolted against the sectarian system in Lebanon and the rising sectarian system in Iraq. There was an attempt in the last 2 days to marginalize this movement, but we think it's deep-rooted. We think that the opposition to the sectarian system in these countries, especially by the young generation, is genuine. And it's not an ephemeral incident that will pass fast, but we think it's a deep-rooted cultural and generational phenomenon that will accompany us in the next few years. So, in spite of the incident that happened yesterday and marginalized a little bit the uprising in these countries. So, anyway, I think we will be witnessing important developments concerning the issue we are discussing today. Now, I chose the title Sectarianism Without Sects because I believe that the phenomenon that should interest us is sectarianism, actually, and it produces, according to my thesis, what I call imagined, not what I call, what Benedict Anderson called imagined communities, but I use his term imagined communities to the communities of shared, to the imagined communities of shared religion that emerges in the region since the 19th century, since the entrance of colonialism and the phase of transition from the traditional Ottoman Sultanate rule to the Tanzimat period and the meeting with colonial powers in the region, that we start witnessing the so-called millet system, or the extending of local communities to encompass larger communities that can only be imagined communities. Until then, I believe that communities of shared religion were local communities and not imagined communities, not large imagined communities. Of course, for a time, some people mix between the confessionalization process of large demographics by countries like the Safavids and the Ottomans, but I do not mix confessionalization with sectarianization. These are totally two different phenomena. People adopting confessions on wide scales, driven by state ideologies, like the case of the Safavids and the Ottomans, in their conflict, does not mean that they turn into communities defined by religion. These are two different things, according to my estimation. Now, I say sectarianism without sects for two reasons. First of all, try to stick by the sociological definition of sect in order not to lose it, because I think it's too precious to lose it. Weber made a lot of work that we should not neglect, actually, when he differentiated between church and sect. So sect, I think, is still a very important analytical tool in explaining certain movements and organizations, or communities, if you like, that are actually splitting from the mainstream in religion, that carry a kind of protest blend to it, that go back to true religion, that are volunteer people are not born into, but they volunteer to. They choose to be a part of a sect. They choose to be a member of a sect because it abides by the true interpretation of religion against mainstream religion or churches, etc. So I think it's a very important phenomenon. It's still there with us. I can use it, for example, to explain Islamic movement, political Islamic movements today, and not ta'ifas, not communities of shared religions. These are two different phenomena. So I think we cannot use we should not quit, we should not give up the explanatory power of the concept sect and use it to explain communities of shared religion. These are two different phenomena at all. Of course, still in the common language, as I know in Ireland, they still use sects for Catholics and Protestants. Weber would protest that too much. You can't use sect for Catholics and Protestants in general. He used it usually to secessionist religious movements and not to large communities who share religion, whether they are believers or not. Communities of shared religions encompass people who could be believers and could be not believers. They are born into, they don't choose it. It's a kind of identity when it becomes a kind of reflective consciousness about it. If we develop reflective consciousness about it, it turns into an identity, but not sectarian. Sectarian is something very specific. I think that's what I say. Let's discuss sectarianism, because we use the subject, we use the concept, and not sects. So this is the first reason that I say sectarianism without sects. The other reason is what I considered in my book, and this is actually the main thesis of the book, that it's not communities of shared religion that are producing sectarianism in modernity, but the contrary. The opposite is true. Sectarianism is producing communities of shared religion, but as imagined communities. This is the new process that I think happened in modernity, which means that not the plurality of religious confessions in our countries is responsible for sectarianism. It is not a phenomenon that has always been there and it will last forever. It's a modern phenomenon produced by sectarianism. Sectarianism produces communities of shared religion as imagined communities, and not the opposite. So what we should discuss, I believe, is not the communities themselves, but the phenomena of sectarianism, which is a social, political phenomenon, modern social, political, that has to do with the state. There has always been in our societies and other societies communities of shared religions, but they were small local communities that did not play a political role. There were, at least in the Arab world, other so-called primordial communities, according to Clifford Gates' concept. Other primordial communities played a political role, much more than communities of shared religion, which were the tribes. Guilds, for example, in the Islamic medieval city, guilds played a very important role in the public space. If we agree to use the word public space in that time, and the tribal communities, the concept of Asabiyya in Ibn Khaldun is based totally on the role of tribes in achieving power, and he actually understood states as dynasties. Dynasties composed of clans that could lead tribes to power through asabiyya, which is this strong sense of belonging to the tribe. You can translate it into a kind of fanaticism, but it's not exactly this. It's a strong belonging, a strong bond that connects the members of the tribe to the tribe that could be led by the leading clan in the tribe to power. This was the most important, if you want, primordial community in the medieval times in the Islamic history, and not the communities of shared religion. The ummah, which shared a confession, or the different which shared a creed, and the different confessions to which this creed split, did not become a political important factor in the development of the Arab states, i.e. Arab dynasties. Unless we are speaking about sects, which are schismatic, secessionist organizations that actually went back to true religion and in certain cases turned into oppositional political streams in Islamic history. Having said that, if I turn to the importance of sectarianism in the contemporary Arab world, actually we are speaking about the three different factors. First of all, the meeting with the West, if you want, the interference of colonialism in the Middle East and using the protection of minorities in order to interfere in internal affairs of the Sultanate, especially in the Arab Mashriq, and the rising consciousness of minorities that straddles borders of states, that extends over wide areas of state and turning from local communities into millets, huge communities, imagined communities that share interest in vis-à-vis the state and vis-à-vis foreign powers. They share certain interests vis-à-vis the state and vis-à-vis certain power, and develop with the time leadership which is secular leadership, not clergy. There starts a differentiation between religious leadership and sectarian leadership, a kind of secularization. We can understand the emergence of sectarianism as a part of imposed secularization process in a way from above. That we start to have leadership of religious communities, communities of shared religion that are secular people, not anymore clergy, not anymore people with religion. This starts to develop, I believe, in the 19th century. Of course, we can give a lot of examples about the development in Lebanon and in Syria in those times. This is the first, I think, great transformation of local religious communities or small ta'ifas in Arabic in districts and regions, in cities, etc., that have local leadership, into imagined communities that share certain interests in relations with the West, in relation with the sultanates, with a new kind of ta'ifa is used. Now I will stop a little bit with the word ta'ifa. The word ta'ifa in Arabic, that's why I use it throughout my book. I don't use sect and I don't use church. I use ta'ifa to explain the specific phenomena that we have here. The word ta'ifa in Arabic means a group which is a part of. That's why we say ta'ifa min, a kind of category, fi'ah in Arabic. Ta'ifa in Arabic is a group which is a part of. طائفة من المؤمنين, طائفة من الكفار, طائفة من المنافقين. It's a group of, it's a part of. That's why here are the roots of its negative connotations in the future, which is splitting, partition, division. So it's a group which is a part of. Now, it was used in the medieval phase in the Islamic history in describing guilds, professions, brotherhoods in the cities. So it was tawa'if al-hirafiyin, the groups of craft people. It wasn't used at all for religion. It wasn't used at all for describing a group that shared a certain creed or religion. It was used for professions. For a certain period of time, it was used for Sufi orders. So Ibn Arabi was called Shaykh al-Ta'ifa, but it was kept for very few people. The first usage of Ta'ifa to describe religious groups was among the Sufis. It wasn't used to describe Shia, Sunnis, etc. What was used was firaq, from tafarruq, which is splitting, division, and only on the confessional, with the confessional connotations, different theological, jurisprudential, confessional differences made people into firaq. So it wasn't a sociological or social description of communities at all. So the Sunnis were not a community. It was a stream in jurisprudence. There was no Sunni community. The Shi'is were not a community. Here I come to a very interesting phenomena of a guy called Wali Nasser in the United States, who wrote an important book that became a reference for the Barack Obama administration about the Middle East. And when I heard Obama once speaking about a war between Shia and Sunni communities that extends 800 years and we don't want to have anything, I said he read Wali Nasser. Or some of his advisors read Wali Nasser for him, as if there were always Shia and Sunni communities in our history fighting each other. This is a modern phenomenon. There was no such thing. There were fights in neighborhoods of Baghdad in the 4th century, and not between Shi'is and Sunnis, but between neighborhoods, actually between Hanbalis and Shi'is, not between Sunnis and Shi'is, and in certain cases even between Hanbalis and Shafi'is. These were times of confessional splits and not intercommunitarian wars called sectarian wars. This is new. Sectarian wars in our history are modern. We should differentiate. I won't have time enough to explain everything, and I can't speak as fast as Dana, as I said. So I will try my best to bring most of my remarks here in the time that is left for me. We should differentiate, I believe, between religious wars and sectarian wars. Wars that were launched or that erupted after confessional differences, etc., and in which this was used for political reasons by different forces, etc. For example, I believe that what happened in Europe in the 30 Years' War was a religious war. And I believe that in the Arab East, there were some religious wars, and there was religious discrimination, for example, against dhimmis, against non-Muslims. There was such a thing. Of course, there was such a thing. But it wasn't sectarian. It means it wasn't based on organized communities that are fighting over shares in the state, that are fighting about the distribution of interests, who have representatives, elites, sectarian elites, who represent their interests and fight among each other about shares in the state, for example. It wasn't that. I believe that sectarianism is a modern phenomenon which is connected to the modern state first. It's about sharing, about fighting, about quotas, about shares in the state. And by this fighting, by this conflict, it reproduces communities that believe that they have shared interest in the state. So I think that it's very important for our subject to differentiate between religious war and sectarian wars. So there were some religious confessional skirmishes in the neighborhoods of Baghdad of the 4th century. This is totally different from a phenomena like civil war, 75-77 in Lebanon, or dividing Iraq into one ethnicity on the one hand called the Kurds, and two imagined communities of shared confession, which is Shi'is and Sunnis, fighting. Now, imagining the history of the Muslims as a continuous, extending war between Shias and Sunnis in the last 8th century is actually projection of modernity, projection of contemporary history on the history as a whole. That's why it's very important to differentiate, to distinguish between sectarianism and religious differences, sectarianism and different confessional interpretations. Now, I said the first transformation, if you want, was the 19th century, the meeting with colonialism and the tanzimat and the reforms actually the legal reforms in Istanbul called the Tanzimat 1837 to 1856 that culminated at the end with the Ottoman Constitution and the attempt to change or to transform to modernize the Sultanate and to transform it from the dhimmi status and the Muslim status into a kind of Ottoman citizenship, an attempt to build an Ottomanic ummah instead of the empire structure. This attempt actually was rejected by people who felt damaged, who felt by these developments, especially what we call the notables in the Arab cities and some of the clergy of the Arab cities. I think the developments at that time, including the interference of France, Britain, Austria, Russia, in their what we can call turf wars for clout in the Middle East, for more influence in the Arab Mashriq, was the first transformation, if you want, to the violent sectarianism that took place between Lebanon, the end of the 50s of the 19th century, and 1860 in Damascus. It turned into actually massacres against minorities. The social protest at that time took the form of protest, of violence against minorities in their neighborhoods, accusing them actually of cooperating with colonial powers and blaming them for putting more taxes on Muslims, individual taxes, not anymore the jizya taxes only on the Christians, but taxes on Muslims, and recruiting people to the army, etc. It all took the form of protest against minorities. But I think the national movement and the Arab National Liberation Movement was, in a sense, a reaction to these developments. The Arab National Movement and the Arab Liberation movements against colonialism after the Ottoman phase took the form of unifying and healing the wounds of sectarianism. In a way, the secular dimension of Arab nationalism was anti-sectarian. You know, we have different interpretations of secularism and secularization in the West. But here in the Middle East, secularism was not so much about church and state. There was no issue of church and state. I need long time to explain it. It was about sectarianism. The blend, the secular blend in Arab nationalism was anti-sectarian. People wanted to pass the chapter, the bloody chapter actually, of the second half of the 19th century in sectarian issues. But Arab nationalism did not succeed to build Arab nation in a state, on the one hand. And on the other hand, it did not succeed in building civic nations in regional states, like it happened. So it turned into an ideology that became an apologetic ideology for Arab regimes. It was actually calcified and hollowed from inside, from its content, because it did not succeed to build an Arab nation as an alternative to sectarianism, neither also a civic nation in the Arab states that treats individuals according to citizenship. So actually turned into an ideology of Arab regimes. And when these Arab regimes could not deliver what was their source of legitimacy, material needs, Arab unity, liberation of Palestine, etc., a list of about six, 7 components of the legitimacy of these Arab regimes, post-colonial Arab regimes. People went back for, first of all, these Arab regimes became more dictatorial, more violent, because they lacked legitimacy. They compensated it by more violence, and actually it became a naked despotism in the last few decades. People had refuge, searched refuge in communities against the state. What the communities that were there? The imagined religious community, which was produced in the 19th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, did not disappear. It was only marginalized, so it was resurrected. What helped in this resurrection, rejuvenating of the religious imagined community of shared religion, was the fact that in the meantime, political Islamic movements emerged. And they spoke about the Ummah in religious language as against the secular Ummah, the ethnic nationality. The other factor that helped in resurrecting, if you want to summon up again the communities of shared religion, is that are two axes in the Arab world that emerge who carry two different confessions, Saudi Arabia and Iran, and a kind of polarization in the region started between Shias and Sunnis, and other factors that I cannot enumerate all of them in these opening remarks, that made it possible that the alternative for the hollowed ideology of despotic regime suddenly became sectarianism again, and it helped reproduce the imagined communities of sects, Shi'is and Sunnis, etc., in our region. So in my remarks, I would concentrate on, first, the last phase or the modernization of the Ottoman Empire and the involvement of colonial powers, Western powers, for their competition for influence in the region through protection of minorities. Second, the crisis of the Arab state. Third, the regional axis in the region, especially Saudi Arabia and Iran, and the formation of these axes. These are the reasons that sectarianism reproduced again imagined communities that I call imagined ta'ifas. I don't believe that the Shi'is and Sunnis are ta'ifas. Actually, the Sunnis were never a ta'ifa in our history. They consider themselves the mainstream in Islam, the follower of the Muslim orthodoxy, but they are not a community. They never formed a community of any kind. In the case of the Sunnis, neither local nor regional community, actually. There was no community that encompassed Shafi'is, Hanbalis, etc. as one community in the past. And the Shi'is became an imagined community, I believe, for a time during the Safavid monarchy, if you want, but for a short time. At the end, they could confessionalize the Iranians by force, and it happened by force, like it happened in Europe in the 16th, 17th century. But it did not extend to all the Shi'is in the world becoming one community of shared religion, and they could not control them all, or influence them all, or mobilizing them as one community. It never happened. And also the Sunnis, if you want, turning the Sunni madhabs into real schools happened in the Mamluki era. There was an attempt of the Ottomans to confessionalize the Anadolu against the small extremist Sunni sects, but They did not turn the Sunnis in the world into one community. What is imagined in the West today as Sunni-Shi'i conflict, the way it is now, is not only a modern phenomenon, it's a contemporary phenomenon that has to do with the developments after the Iranian revolutions and the splits in the Arab world, the way the splits happen. Thank you very much.